So the International Court of Justice today announced its decision that Israel needs to halt its military operations in Rafah. This is following a demand, of course, by South Africa, who first went to that court with claim that Israel is committing genocide. This time the court did exactly what South Africa wanted, exactly when they wanted it, which is basically it's a demand that Israel no longer attempt to prevent Hamas from doing what they clearly state repeatedly that is their only aim and their only reason for existence, which is to kill all the Jews in Israel. I think this shows what we already know, which is this court is not something, is not a body that should be taken seriously by anybody who wants to see freedom and peace, true peace, happen. And it also says what we've also been saying for a while about the general idea of international law and how it's not really a thing, but it's there to kind of blame the victims, the true victims of true atrocities for ever trying to prevent such atrocities from happening or to respond to them in the appropriate way. Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 231 of the war in Israel. I'm joined by Morgan. Morgan, your thoughts on this?
Well, as you say, this is the culmination of a few months of various decisions by the ICJ. The current president, who isn't the president who was there initially when the case started, the American judge, it's now another judge, has ruled that Israel has to stop its offensive, withdraw, allow investigators to come in to investigate whether genocide has been going on and to report back within about a month, I think, as to its progress with that. And commentators on the ICJ decision, some of them recognize that the kind of decisions that they've been making have been pro the Palestinian side of things, but lots of them haven't. Lots of them have viewed it as kind of insufficient decisions. Will probably view this actually as insufficient because any military action, in their view, really by Israel in Gaza is illegitimate. And I think what you see these court decisions adding up to is the view that any military action that Israel is taking in Gaza is ruled out by the logic that the court is using. Because if you look at the Rafah offensive, what Israel has actually done is it hasn't engaged in a kind of blitzkrieg style combat where it's just mown down Rafah as it could do given its military strength. It's sent soldiers into the edges of the city. It's engaged in fairly restricted airstrikes, and it's seized the crossing from Rafah into Egypt and closed it. That's what it's done. Nothing like the full destruction that it could wreak on Rafah. And yet it's being treated like that's what it's doing. So the question that, again, the people need to ask is, what military action could Israel take to combat Hamas in Gaza or in Rafah that would be legitimate? And actually, in the view of this court, it would have to be nothing. They would have to just withdraw. And what was notable about the decision, and the reason why this is a pro-Hamas decision, is that it was welcomed by Hamas. One of their senior officials made a statement about this, saying that we welcome the decision. And they called upon the UN Security Council to implement this practically. So the thing about this, the ICJ and this decision, is that it's not binding in any way. Although it's put in very strong language, Israel did nothing actually to enforce it upon Israel except condemnation, some moral force in effect, rather than any literal force. And the UN Security Council actually can't do very much either, but can perhaps give it a bit more oomph, so to speak. So this decision, people just have to see, is anti-Israel. It's pro-Hamas. It's actively against Israel's interests. And it's in favor of the interests of the people who want to see the destruction of Israel and to see October 7th wrecked again and again and again.
Thank you, Ori, for the super chat. Carla says here in the chat, it's essentially saying there cannot be any war ever except it has ignored some wars. Yeah, and it's not even ignoring the war. It's ignoring one side in this war. And that's kind of what this court is and what the idea of international law is in a nutshell. So yeah, like you said, and I see here in this BBC report, it says the ICJ can make legally binding rulings in disputes between countries, but has little way of enforcing its orders. Uh, I mean, the big issue for me was when the South African case was brought to the ICJ about Israel allegedly committing genocide in Gaza, that Israel even took part, that it responded, that it decided that they're going to send representatives there to say, no, look, we're not committing a genocide, which of course you shouldn't do, because the very idea that this is being discussed when we know that the genocidal side here that is not committing genocide only because Israel is armed and preventing them from doing so are the Palestinians. The Palestinians, if anybody listened to them, you don't have to listen to Hezbollah. You don't need to listen to Israeli propagandists. You need to listen to the Palestinians to know that the Palestinians want nothing other than to commit genocide. And yet this is completely ignored. There's no court in the world that is going to rule on them. And it brings us back to the idea of international law that we've talked about on this channel many times, including long before October 7th. There is no such thing as international law. It's not like in a country where you have a legal system and it is a system. And if you legislate, you can change an existing law, which means it is no longer the law and something else has replaced it. And it's enforced, and you can like the laws, you can dislike the laws, but they are there and they are knowable. Whereas international law is any treaty, any agreement, any combination of various different things that some countries sign up to, some of them, and some countries don't. And of course, countries sign up to things that contradict their own laws, and there is no real enforcement. International law is it's like Kantian logic. It's basically an attempt to destroy what it is claiming to be, which is a legal system. It is not a legal system, and of course, played into it. Israel again did the wrong thing here in even taking part or acknowledging this court and then objecting to, and now it's in a bit of a bind because it's objecting to the decision. It says it's going to continue the operation in Rafah. We'll see if that happens. Of course, we think it should happen. I think it should happen. But yeah, they should have thought about that first. And again, with Netanyahu, I blame him because he does know better. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat.
There's a quote by Ayn Rand from Atlas Shrugged in John Galt's speech, and I might not be getting it exactly, but it's pretty close to this. It's that on each side of every issue, there's a right side and there's a wrong side, but the middle way is always evil. And that's a quote that comes to mind a lot of the time when people are discussing the conflict. It comes to my mind. Because I think the ICJ wouldn't accept what I've said about their decision being pro-Hamas. I think what they would try and say is, we're trying to balance the two sides here. Israel does have a right to defend itself, but it can't just do anything. And so we need to balance the interests of the relative parties here, and we want to protect civilian lives. So they're trying to take a middle way. And the reason why that's evil and actually ends up being a pro-Hamas decision is a point of view which I think it's right to say that Rand articulated, which is that any concession from the good to evil, to try and walk a middle path in that way, acts to the detriment of the good side. And you can see that very practically here. Israel has to take certain actions to defend itself. And Israel is the justified party here. It's the party that's defending itself, and it's the free nation. And yet to try and walk a middle way, to say that, oh, Israel, we're not going to stop the whole military action in Gaza, but we're going to stop it where you really need to go in and do it because we need to protect civilian lives on the other side, and so on. That is actively acting to the detriment of Israel. And if Israel does act according to this, which I think I may have seen Netanyahu saying that he yesterday that no matter what the decision is, it's not going to halt them. If they do act according to this, so if Netanyahu does acquiesce to this, then I don't see how the war can be effective any longer because it's saying that here's a part of Gaza where Hamas can go, and there's what can you do? There's nothing you can do to root them out. So the court is saying that Hamas has a safe haven here, and if you dare go and touch them, you're guilty of genocide. And this, although in this decision they didn't explicitly say you will be guilty of committing genocide, they're just sending in these investigators. The president's statement said that he called upon Israel to immediately halt its military offensive and any other action in the Rafah governorate, which may inflict on the Palestinian group in Gaza conditions of life that could bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. Now, particularly that end bit about the Palestinian group bringing about their destruction in whole or in part is the language from the definition of genocide which that court uses. So it's kind of saying without saying it that the military action in Gaza is perpetrating a genocide or would perpetrate a genocide. And again, what military action would be possible? None, but it's also saying that the military action that Israel is taking, which is ordinary for any kind of course of a war, would constitute a genocide. And what an amazing precedent to try and set. So the Western countries, which will no doubt welcome this as a wonderful, cuddly humanitarian action, when they need to next go to war, when the US does, when the UK does, or whoever, what are we going to do? Because we will take actions similar to what has to be done in Rafah. I would hope more decisively and forthrightly than actually how Israel has waged the offensive against Rafah. And logically, we have nothing to defend ourselves against the charge that we too would be committing genocide. And so this is a rod for our own back that we will celebrate.
Yeah, and you made an excellent point there with the idea that if they're saying, well, you just can't go into Rafah, they are saying Rafah must be held by Hamas. There is no other way to look at this because it's not that they're not saying anything else about it. They're not saying Hamas must lay down their arms, which of course they wouldn't do if this court said that or if anybody said that. There's nothing in there that suggests a way to prevent Hamas from continuing to exist. And knowing that Hamas continuing to exist means Hamas continuing to murder Jews at any opportunity that they have. So yeah, you said that they wouldn't see this as pro-Hamas, and it reminds me of I think it was somebody from Spain, a Spanish diplomat, but one of the countries that just recognized Israel, saying, well, actually, this is very pro-Israel because it'll bring about peace. And of course, we've talked about how historically moves towards Palestinian political autonomy, let alone a state, have brought about peace. What they brought about is mass murder on a greater and greater scale each time. But of course, the deputy prime minister of Spain, I don't know if you saw this, also said today or yesterday, she actually said from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So she's actually stating in the clearest of terms what we already know Spain's position is, which is that Israel must cease to exist. The Jews must be exterminated in Israel because she knows that the only Palestinians who are offering to govern that region would do that. So yeah, we need. Here's my positive takeaway from all this is I think the divide is becoming clear. And I think it's becoming clearer and clearer when we have all these supposed official bodies saying that, that Israel is the bad guy and the savages who committed the atrocities on October 7th live streamed themselves and came home to basically an impromptu parade, victory parade. That these are the good guys. The people who tell you these are the good guys are the bad guys. The Hamas is obviously the bad guys, but the people who don't want Hamas destroyed are the bad guys. And more people, regular viewers of this channel, I'm sure, have a clear understanding of why that is. But I think more and more people look at these things and maybe they buy into some of the bullshit, oh no, innocents are dying and so on. But the more stuff like this happens, the more that divide is becoming clearer, there are evil people, not just in the Middle East, there are evil people among us, and we should know that and and act accordingly.
Yes. And I did see that video by the Deputy Prime Minister of Spain. And it's extraordinary how so many of these kind of officials who, seemed to have been acting in a pro-Palestine way. I mean, and of course that means ultimately pro-Hamas, seem to be they seem to be acting that way. But there wasn't any direct evidence that they necessarily celebrated the Palestinian cause, that they were anti-Israel. And yet slowly over time, drip, 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 you see these little bits of evidence coming out, like her, or even like Francesca Albanese, who is terrible. But I hadn't thought before that she would have explicitly affiliated with some of the real anti-Israel people out there in the world. I thought she would have tried to cover herself a little bit by saying things, or by saying that she's not anti-Israel. She just thinks that the Palestinian people have the right to a state, or something like that, right? And yet the other day she appeared on Abby Martin's podcast. And Abby Martin, we covered her a few days ago, is explicitly someone who thinks that Israel doesn't have a right to exist, and explicitly thinks the Palestinian cause is superior. So it's amazing how actually the people who seem to be really anti-Israel actually will just come out and say it sometimes. So it's immensely disappointing. I wonder how many of the actual judges on the court think and feel in that same way. However, ultimately, the logic of the court, the logic that they seem to be running on and using, is such that I think almost any judge put into that position would probably come away, if they were implementing those kind of decisions faithfully, would come away with similar decisions. And that's because the actual entire basis that they're operating from, their basic premises, are flawed, and would act to counteract any just war, any defensive war that was being waged. So, when we're calling on the channel for Western countries like the US, the UK, or whoever to withdraw from the UN and to withdraw from any treaties that make them subject to the International Criminal Court, is really, really important that we do that. And yet I have little to no hope that that's ever going to be put into place in the near future.
Yeah, I think it was Clementine who asked earlier if America abides by international law, and of course, there's no right answer. That's the thing with with this whole supposed system. Yes and no. Those are the answers, and at the same time and in the same actions. Nobody can really know. That's what we have international law for. It's supposedly to prevent wars, but there's a war on knowledge going on, and that legal system is leading the way. You mentioned Francesca Albanese. Just to remind people, she claimed that Israel was committing a genocide within a week after October 7th. She said nothing of the sort when it came to the Palestinian people doing what they did on October 7th. But and of course, we forget that Palestinians, especially when we talk about October 7th, a big part of what they were doing was there were rockets. There were more rockets that day than any other day in history from Gaza. I don't remember the exact number, but that was a part of it. Because all over the parts of Israel where rockets couldn't reach from Gaza, people were under sirens and were hiding it, and that was what people were noticing, which helped them do what they did in the area around Gaza. Those rockets go, they're an attempt to kill anyone. They're never mentioned. So much of what Hamas is doing is never mentioned. When it's mentioned, it's like it's mentioned in the way it was mentioned in the Guardian article we were going through yesterday. In paragraph 10, as part of a sentence talking about Israel's alleged crimes, they say, well, this was a response to October 7th. The Abby Martin, Francesca Albanese podcast is something I unfortunately somehow missed it. I don't know, was it good? Is it worth watching? It sounds like a fantastic diet plan. Watch that repeatedly, and you'll lose a lot of weight in 24 hours.
I think my camera's lagging a bit. Can you hear me?
We hear you like problematically,
Okay. I'll come back in a
robotic, as
second.
Daniel puts it.
Let me just rejoin the call.
All right. So while Morgan leaves and rejoins, I will thank our super chatters. Uh, thank you, Stefan, for the super chat. Thank you, Larisetto. I want to wait till Morgan comes back before I read the super chat. So I will give it a minute so he can rejoin. But yeah, I haven't really had time to see some of the responses. I can only imagine though the responses from the likes of Owen Jones. I'm sure there's got to be a video already. I as I mentioned, he blocked me on Twitter. Daniel, I don't know if you're not blocked and you can check and see what he says, but my guess is something like well, something like we what we put in the title, but in Owen Jones' words, well, now it's official. Israel is committing war crimes. Owen Jones, of course, always takes it a few steps further. So he claimed that I think he claimed the previous ruling was the ICJ calling what Israel is doing genocide, but I'm not 100% sure about that. We've heard others who have done that. Um, anyway, yeah, if anybody wants to tell me what Owen Jones said, I can sleep well at night knowing that he maybe is now on the right side of things. So. Um, Larisetto says 364 days per year now. October 7th has been canceled from human memory, according to the ICJ. Well, I mean, it's been canceled. Uh, it's been canceled in not just by the ICJ. So much goes on here. There was Morgan. I don't know if you saw this story about there was a screening of one of the movies about the massacre of October 7th in London, and there were protests against that screening. This is not this is not something like what we do here on the channel, saying why people should support Israel, why people should oppose the Palestinians. In which case, you can expect these people to show up as they do in our chat from time to time. These protesters were protesting against showing what the Savages did in the music festival. And this is not seen or reported as clearly siding not just with the people who did that, but with the action itself. It's not just siding with Hamas, it's siding with what Hamas did on October 7th. And we have that becoming more and more mainstream in this country, which again, as I mentioned before, I see the positive in it. I see it as, you know what, these people, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we see who these people are. Morgan.
I didn't see that video that you're referring to. I did see a video of the ambassadors for Norway, Spain, and Ireland being shown the video of the girls being taken by Hamas on October 7th that we played on the channel yesterday. That was a small measure of justice, and that gave me some satisfaction. Owen Jones actually has just made a comment in the last few hours about the ICJ on Twitter, which I can read out if you like.
Of course, what what is the daily objective without Owen Jones? And we haven't heard from him in a while, mostly since he blocked me. Yeah, go ahead.
So he says, coming after the ICC arrest warrant request, the ICJ ruling makes it abundantly clear. This is one of the great horrors and crimes of our age. Everyone who backed it is getting damned by history. You were warned from the start and you refused to listen. Israel's leaders made it clear from the start that they were going to commit one of the worst crimes of our age. They left no room for interpretation in their public statements. They then spent approaching 8 months committing every crime under the sun in full public view. Israel's apologists, I guess that's us, cannot plead ignorance. They knew exactly what Israel was doing by virtue of A, what Israel's leaders said over and over again, B, more documentation and evidence of any horror in history as it was actually happening. So that's what he said.
Yeah, I'm not an Israel apologist. I oppose what Israel is doing. I think what Israel is doing is a crime against Israelis because it is It is not identifying the enemy, which is the Palestinian people. It is sending soldiers, hundreds of soldiers died protecting Palestinian civilians. I think what I would be an Israel apologist if Israel actually took military action that destroyed Gaza, made it uninhabitable for the people currently inhabiting it, and kicked out whoever is left. That's the type of action I would support, which is true justice, not what Owen Jones, who is of course a Marxist, who supported Jeremy Corbyn and wants to destroy this country, wants this country to look like Gaza pre-October 7th. Yeah, that's and it's there was something in that I wanted to specifically comment about, but it slipped my mind. Owen Jones has this effect on me, Morgan.
I suppose he's soporific at times. I mean, like that kind of line that he's just trotted out is just a more strong statement of the view that's taken by a lot of people, and which is really the implicit attitude that's coming from the ICJ and from the UN in general. The attitude of a lot of the UN's officials has been abominable towards Israel in the light of October 7th and given its military action in Gaza. So even though Owen Jones, is especially vile and puts himself across in an especially vile way, he's also articulating in very clear sentences the point of view of the court. And the ICJ is it's the International Court of Justice, and yet justice has nothing to do with what its decisions actually consist of. So, people take it as axiomatic that Western countries need to be a part of these kind of institutions, and they kind of feel like, what would we be if we weren't a part of this? We would suddenly become unimportant on the world stage, and that is just a sign of a lack of self-esteem. And Western countries need to be more forthright in saying that these countries frustrate good nations, free nations, from doing what they need to do to protect themselves, and will have nothing to do with it.
Yeah. What I wanted to say about Owen Jones was just a reminder for people who weren't watching the channel at the time for whatever reason. We covered him and we covered some of his videos. We covered him talking about how he saw the IDF movie of basically that they showed the videos that Hamas took of themselves, and he pays lip service to, oh, Hamas committed atrocities and so on, and then he spends the rest of the time denying basically everything that is known, including things that are obvious from many of those videos and many other videos that have been shared on social media, like the mass rape of Israeli women, is something Owen Jones has kind of made a career in recent months of denying, while he's making videos and tweeting about any instance where there's any claim of something like that being done to Palestinians anywhere, including that claim that a woman was raped by IDF soldiers in Al-Shifa Hospital, which was then denied by her brother, and Owen Jones then deleted it and then said, well, sometimes we have to delete this stuff. But he chose with zero knowledge. And again, there have been multiple times that they did this because they saw that Israel, I guess, gets some sympathy over this from some people. They said, okay, well, we can't have Israel getting sympathy over anything. Let's claim that Israel is doing the same. Owen Jones is again, he is a Goebbels level propagandist for the current the Nazis of our time. And yeah, I believe we did a show titled what was it? Modern Day Holocaust Denial, and I think Owen Jones was on the thumbnail for that, which is very appropriate. Um, with this ruling and everything, people seem to have it's hasn't taken a very prominent place in the news. The news of what was found in an UNRWA, the most recent thing that was found in an UNRWA facility in Gaza. But in case you thought there was a difference between UNRWA and Hamas, you should definitely watch the reality show, which starts a couple of minutes after this show goes off the air. Thanks, Morgan. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Comment, like, subscribe, and share this video if you find it valuable. And of course, tune into the reality show. We'll see you there.
Bye-bye.